When we talk finances, what we're really talking about is maintaining our commitment to kids and our community. We're a service organization. Obviously, there's a financial component of that. I think sometimes we get lost, when we start talking finances, we forget about the why. And the why is, it's always about our kids. I'm also going to refer back to, a community survey that was given almost a year ago, where we went out and we wanted information. We wanted feedback from our community. How are we doing? In the spirit of, number one, that helps us get better, gives us things to work on, gives us targeted places to improve. It also gave us, a sense of community pride in our schools. And 3 of the responses they gave are on this slide. 76% of people said they have trust and confidence in our teachers. 72% said they feel the quality of Shakopee's education is comparable to or better than neighboring districts. When I get into the financial part of this, and I'll show you a lot of numbers there, we're providing an incredible value for the money. Our services are comparable to neighboring districts. Many of them have much more each and every year in terms of revenue than do we. So I think we're doing some things that are pretty amazing, given our financial constraints already. And then 66% of residents who gave an opinion said they'd give Shakopee Public Schools an A or B for education quality. And that's higher than the national benchmark. That same question is part of the Phi Delta Kappa national survey asking people what they think about schools. To flip back to, we're doing all kinds of great things with kids, and it truly is about maintaining our commitment to kids. To maintain a commitment to kids, we need highly trained, highly skilled teachers. We're doing some great things with real life experiences across the district. The academies of Shakopee are breaking down those walls, and partnering with all kinds of different organizations outside of the traditional school walls to create some really cool learning experiences. We've got reasonable class sizes. We've got great things happening. E12. We've done a lot of work in the area of literacy. We've got lots of opportunities for kids to participate. And then one thing that I think sometimes we take for granted, but it's not the norm. Our level of community partnerships for both students and staff is off the charts good. And so I think it's a reflection of, some of the things that we absolutely need to maintain, and we'll do everything we can to maintain. This slide is where I shift and I start talking money and financial reality and financial outlook. And this is part of the evidence when I say, hey, we're providing great value for the money. The red bar, or the red bars on this, that's us. The dark gray bar, that's the metro average. The light gray bar, that's the state average. If we compare the revenue we receive per student, we get about $1,800 less per student every year than the metro average. And as you would expect then, we spend about $1,800 less per student than the metro average. And that's a significant difference. And to be able to provide the level of services that we currently are with the finances we have is a testament to our district really putting kids first and doing good work. All districts in Minnesota have challenges with funding. And a lot of it stems from the basic general ed aid. Our per pupil aid that we get every year from the state, that is the base or the lion's share of our funding. When we look at that and we compare what we're getting, which is the red line, and we compare to that dotted gray line, and there's a gap. The dotted gray line, we go back to 2003, and if state funding, per pupil funding, had just kept pace with inflation, in other words, the dollar would buy today what a dollar bought in 2003, we would receive more than $5 million in revenue each and every year from the state. And that would go a long ways towards solving our budget challenges. And then another piece of the funding, when we start talking state and federal government, and I want to be really, really clear here. The programming itself is incredible. It's necessary, but we've got some partially funded mandates from the state and federal government in the areas, primarily special education and English learner education. And in both those areas, again, the programming itself is fantastic. Students are amazing. The teachers are amazing. But the state and the federal government have not kept their promise in regards to the portion that they're going to pay for those services. And that's when you hear the word cross-subsidy. In Shakopee alone, we take $9 million out of our general fund to cover the costs of special ed and EL. In other words, we're covering what the state, what the federal government should be picking up. And that's a significant amount of money each and every year. We have some other types of funding gaps. When we compare to districts similar to us, you'll notice on this graph, we have no bar. Shakopee Public Schools has no voter-approved operating levy. That puts us about $1,250 per student below the metro average. The last time local voters approved an operating levy increase, more than a decade ago. If we had the same voter-approved operating levy as the metro average, we would receive an additional $11.4 million in revenue each year. So again, when I talk about our district providing value for the money, we are absolutely delivering that. This is the slide I like the least in this whole presentation. This slide shows, it's about our fund balance, shows where we were, shows where we are now, and then it shows next year. And I'm not going to relitigate the past. Many of you lived it. There's a gray bar for fund balance goal, running across the diagram. We're short of that fund balance goal currently. We were making progress, the last 3 years. When we look at next year, we have a significant challenge. Our expenditures right now are projected to be $2.5 million greater than our revenue. In other words, we're projecting a $2.5 million budget deficit next year. And then it gets worse the following year. And so we've got to fix that problem. That's when I'm talking about budget challenges, financial challenges, that's at the core of it. That's it. There are three options to rebuild a fund balance and to have balanced budgets. And those are reduce expenses, increase revenue, or you do a combination of those two things. And you'll see later that I believe that we're going to take a very, very serious look at, and I would strongly recommend we do a two-pronged approach with both budget cuts and we look for an operating levy. At the end of the day, budgeting, simple math. Our expenses need to either be equal to or less than our revenue. Unfortunately, that's not what our future looks like. We've got to fix that math problem. And again, it's making budget cuts, it's increasing revenue through a voter-approved operating levy, or it's doing both of those things. And I believe we're going to make an attempt to do both of those things. It's really, really important to focus on the why. I think sometimes we lose sight of that. Why are you trying to fix the budget problem? Well, number one, we have to. We have no choice. We'd be in statutory operating debt in a couple of years if we didn't. But how are you trying to fix it? What do you value? What's your driving impetus for the decisions you're making? What's your why? And I believe our why at this time, facing this situation, boils down to three things. We want to maintain quality programming and learning opportunities for students. We also want to attract, retain, and fairly compensate high-quality teachers. And then number three, we absolutely have to build a path to long-term financial stability. This is the financial projection model that Bill and his team have created for our district. You'll notice right smack in the middle of the numbers, there's a red box that has minus $2,542,271. That's the $2.5 million budget deficit we're looking at at the end of next school, for next school year. And then you'll notice if you go to the right, the numbers get worse. We put strike through those because we can't go there. We're not going to go there. We'd be in statutory operating debt. You'll also notice in the top right, there's a couple boxes highlighted in yellow. Our state budget situation has changed dramatically in the last couple months. Our state was looking at a fund balance in June of 2021 of a positive $2.4 billion. They're now projecting a deficit of $1.6 billion. So our state budget has flipped $4 billion in the wrong direction in the last couple months, largely due to the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So, you heard me lament earlier that state funding hasn't kept pace with inflation. Well, in the yellow box, I think it's quite likely we're going to see the state, which they haven't done for a while, they've done it before. I think state funding might be 0 and 0 in those years, which further exacerbates our challenges. Budget deficits are being projected in future years. We do nothing, which is not an option. That our fund balance would go from the end of 21, where it's 1.1 million to the good, to 4.7 million to the bad at the end of the 2022 school year. In other words, it would drop by $5.8 million. We're going to take action before that. We have to do that. And then again, I'm going to refer back to the why. I'm going to begin with number 3 on that list, path to long-term stability. Starting with the 22-23 school year. What that's in reference to is, it takes time for us to implement budget cuts, takes time for us to organize, plan, and run an operating levy and do those things. But after we get those things in place, starting with that 22-23 school year, I've made the strong suggestion to the board that we need to have a target that anybody can look at and go, yep, you're doing it, or no, you're not. And so I believe we need to put at least $500,000 into the unassigned fund balance each year until we get to $10 million. And again, using explicit, specific numbers, very easy for the community and anybody who wants to check and see if we're living up to that promise. It'd be right there in black and white. So I think that's one important piece. The other part would be a two-pronged approach, that combination of budget cuts and increasing revenue through an operating levy. And we've begun to look at plans, narrow things down, find a respectful path forward, one that recognizes our current situation is unlike any other we've had really in the history of public education. And we would begin, the first prong with budget cuts. These would happen no matter what. We're looking to make a little over $2 million in permanent budget cuts this coming school year, and then the 21-22 school year. I think it's important to note that none of that $2,050,000 in budget cuts would come in the form of classroom teachers. We need to start away from the classroom. We need to, tighten our belts, figure that out, and that needs to be a part of the plan forward. The other part is to look at an operating levy. And when you do that, there's only one date you can, it's the first Tuesday of November each year. There's only one date you can run an operating levy in Minnesota for public schools. So that would be November 3rd, 2020. 2.5, 3 months ago, and really for a few months before that, the school board, the district leadership, we were looking at lots of possible ways to do a levy. 6 months ago, we dismissed even a conversation about a phased-in levy. We were looking at more traditional levies then, where you'd ask for all the money you need, and then you'd get it immediately at one time. In light of the current economic situation in our community and state and country and world, I don't think that's a respectful or a prudent approach. So we've begun to look very, very seriously at what's called a phased-in levy. You ask for the money at one time, like November 3rd, 2020, but rather than receiving the levy, which comes from taxpayer dollars, rather than receiving it all at once, it would be phased in over 3 or 4 years. And because it's broken into smaller chunks over time, that tax impact is then also phased in over time. I think that's a prudent, conservative, and respectful, way to consider a levy. We're actually paying off some of our construction notes, the borrowing we did for construction over the next 2 years as well. And actually, that part, we could actually decrease taxpayer, the amount taxpayers are on the hook for with that construction loan is roughly about $600 per pupil. So we could add $600 per pupil to an operating levy, and there'd actually be a slight decrease to the overall taxes we'd be looking at for the first $600 in per pupil revenue we would generate via an operating levy. We're looking at three forms of phased-in operating levies. Again, these are just starting points to get an idea of what it is, what it looks like, give the school board something to look at, consider, kick around, ask questions, change, alter, and I'm just going to briefly show three possibilities. One option would be and the numbers on top are per pupil revenue. So in this case, it would be 400 per pupil in year one, then 300, 200, 100. You'll see in the left column the budget cuts. You'll see the new revenue shows up phased in over a 4-year time period. That's also where the impact is on the taxpayers. It's phased in over 4 years. And then on the right side of the diagram, you'll notice it's starting with fiscal year 23. We're adding at least $500,000 to our unassigned fund balance. There's two more examples of phased-in levies. This is one where it'd be $300 per pupil each of 3 years. And again, if you look at it, it generates, a little less money in year one, and then the overall is a little bit less, and you'll see where that ends up. And then another form of, if you break that, break this into 4 years and change the last two into 150 per pupil. You'll also notice that there'd be more budget reductions needed in 2026. But you'll see the numbers there, and it's and how that might meet the goal. Just to give you a sense of what those might look like, there'll certainly be much more information if we continue to head down that path. We do have one bit of good news financially. Over the next couple of years, we're paying off some of the construction debt that we've had in our district. So there's an opportunity to, in essence, and the voters have to approve it, where we're trading construction debt, and the voters would pick up a slightly less amount of operating levy debt in year one. And so it's what we would call no net tax increase in year one, and then a slight increase in terms of what the voters would be paying on the phased-in levy options years 2 through 4. Part 3, this is my second least favorite slide in this presentation. This is the what if. What if we go through all this, we do the budget cuts, we go out, we ask the voters for an operating levy in November of 20, and they say no. Well, then we need to make another $5.4 million in budget cuts for the 21-22 school year. This would include classroom teachers. This would include things all over the district, everywhere. This would be significantly and detrimentally impactful to how we provide services. And just to be clear, that $5.4 million, yes, it's on top of the other $2 million I was talking about earlier. I don't think there's really a way to cut our way out of the problem. We wouldn't recognize the school district when we're done. By the same token, I think we've got to be very respectful of how much we ask of our community and not ask for too much. And so trying to find that right path forward, that balance, and something that's prudent and conservative and respectful is going to be very, very important. I've alluded to the July 20th date. That's the school board meeting in July. That's where the board will make their final decisions on budget adjustments. We re-engaged the process at the school board meeting on May 18th. We had shut things down due to the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've got a lot of work to do between now and July 20th. And then in conclusion, back to that survey I mentioned, 93% of residents here agree that strong public schools are directly linked to the quality of life and viability of our community. And I would just close by saying I believe in our community. I believe in our schools. I believe in you. We certainly, we've got a tough challenge ahead of us, we're going to find, we're going to find the best path forward, and come out on the other side and end up in good shape.